All right, we are reconvening public meeting number 174 at 5 minutes past 12, and we are with General Counsel Blue.
Commissioners, I have for you today Deputy General Counsel Grossman and Director Bruce Band to talk to you about the variance report. This was something we had our former executive director put together, and I know that you were interested in a report on that. So Mr. Grossman and Mr. Band will speak to you about that.
Thank you, and good morning, members of the commission.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As you'll recall, the commission promulgated a regulation that delegated authority to the executive director to grant variances from the internal control regulations for specific reasons. As part of that process, though, a report was mandated by the executive director to the commission. It's discussed in section 138.02, 6A, and it essentially says that the variance shall be identified in the written approval issued by the executive director and a report filed with the commission that identifies the provision of the regs that a variance was granted from and provides the general reason the variance was granted. And you'll recall that we included this provision to ensure that the commission was aware of any variances that were granted because they wouldn't be done in a public setting. So we have for you today a copy of a report that outlines all of the variances that were granted from the internal control submission presented by Plainridge Park Casino. And essentially, the questions before you revolve around the format and the procedure. So the two questions essentially are you comfortable with this format? There are a number of different options. And secondly, how often would you like to see this report? So as for the format, what you see before you is a report that has two components. The first is a part where we have a grid of all of the variances that were granted and the provisions that were granted a variance from. There's a very basic explanation as to why the variance was granted or not granted for that matter. And then the second part of the report you'll see is a full explanation as to what the request was and why it was granted. And bless you. And what those explanations are, they're direct copy and paste from the approval letters that were sent to the licensee. So the threshold question for me is whether it is of interest to you to see those full explanations as to what the request was and why it was granted. Or are you comfortable with just the grid? And seeing the grid, of course, then you would be able to request to see the letter if that particular variance was of interest to you. So that's the first matter that we seek some guidance on as to the format of this report. And secondly, and this is much quicker, it's just how often you'd like to see this report. Do you want to see it on an annual basis, biannual, or just as the variances are granted from here on out?
Comments?
These 13 requests occurred over what, Thank you. A 6-month period, is that correct?
Well, most of them, that could, I don't recall exactly the time frame, but most of them have and will in the future, I would anticipate, occur during the initial submission of the internal controls to the executive director.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlikely that there'll be any, large changes to these, I would imagine. Probably a one-by-one type thing.
So the bulk will happen up front, and then there'll be an occasional request throughout a time frame?
And we have gotten occasional requests from Penn.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems to me that if this is 6 months, although most of them occurred early, that time frame is fine. 13 is a manageable number. Maybe when we have bigger facilities, we could reconsider and do them in a more timely manner because there may be so many more. But for now, I think a 6-month report like this is certainly appropriate.
With the additional detail?
You know what? It's only a 9-page report. I thought it just gave a little more context, and it was easy to follow, so I think this is appropriate.
I like the summary better than the grid.
Yeah, I like the summary as well. I am learning some of the nuances still about what what's behind the internal controls and the reasons to adjust or not. So I like when you describe what was requested and when you also
And that's
describe the
part of
solution.
the letter to them, so
It's
it's
part of the
something
letter.
easy to put in.
If it's not that onerous and it doesn't sound, as you're pointing out, I really prefer this. So,
What are you referring to as a summary? The summary that's the existing summary here?
yes.
Yeah.
Because the question was whether we would be satisfied with just the grid or the explanation for each of the items that comes underneath the grid. And I
No, I would
like-
agree on that. I would agree that, I think the grid is actually helpful, but that the summary is the crucial part. And do I understand right that if we had a question as to any particular one where there is, and there's redactions in almost all of these, that we would have access to those?
Yes.
Well, we could also get this report outside of the, just be forwarded to us, outside of the public, of the open meeting packet.
You will automatically.
You will get it unredacted.
Yes.
It's here for illustration purposes on the format, and, but
So I think we all agree 6 months in this format was great. What were the standards that you used for redaction on this? Did you do
Yes,
the?
In this case, where there was no public record request or anything that had to do with security, surveillance, or some of the real internal controls, I took out of an abundance of caution. If there were an actual request for it, we'd have to go back and look at it again under the public records law.
it's that intersection between the
In-
public
Internal
records
controls pretty
and the open
basically describes how they do things, and you don't want to just make that an open book necessarily in every phase, is that everyone would know exactly how they operate on doing certain issues.
Okay, anything else on this one? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think Ms. Wells is next.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. As a preliminary matter, I'd like to compliment you on your selection of Mr. Bedrosian as the new executive director. I know how lucky I am to have the opportunity to work for him, and I'm really excited. I'm thrilled that he's part of the team now.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
before the commission this afternoon, I have two key gaming executive licenses for your consideration. The first one is for Roberta Gregoire. She, in April of 2015, was hired to be the compliance manager at Plainridge Park Casino, and therefore was required to obtain a key gaming executive license. She's currently there working under a temporary license. She did submit all the required forms, supplemental document requests to the licensing division and the IEB, and we completed the background check, and I have previously indicated the subject matter for those checks. I won't go over that again. She was interviewed in person by the IEB State Police and financial investigators as part of that standard key gaming employee investigation protocol, and a financial responsibility evaluation was done on her with positive results. She attended Dean College in Franklin, Massachusetts, where she was awarded an Associates of Science degree in Business Administration in 1992. She also attended Bentley College in Newton, Massachusetts, where she was awarded a Bachelor of Science degree in Management in 1999. Prior to her current position at PPC, she held several positions, including compliance manager at Scudder, a premier associate at Fleet Bank, a compliance specialist at Nalone Snap, an associate financial planner at Connolly & Associates, and a compliance manager at Ameriprise Financial. She disclosed in her questionnaire she'd never been licensed in any jurisdictions for any clear gaming activity, and we confirmed that. And generally, there were no significant issues uncovered related to her application for licensure, and she demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that she's suitable for a key gaming employee license, key gaming executive license by the commission, and therefore the IEB is recommending that you vote and award her that license.
Want
So I don't know, do you want to do
these
both?
together?
I can do both, and then we can vote together. The second matter for your consideration is for Seth Stratton. In December of 2014, he was appointed to the position of Vice President and General Counsel of MGM Springfield. As such, he was required to obtain a key gaming employee executive license by the Mass Gaming Commission. He was also interviewed, submitted all the forms, completed all necessary requirements as part of the background investigation. He attended Colgate University, was awarded a bachelor's degree in political science, graduating in 1998. Further disclosed, he attended the University of Massachusetts, where he was awarded a master's degree in public affairs in 2001, and then attended Suffolk University School of Law, where he was awarded a Juris Doctor, graduating in 2004. Prior to his current position, he held several positions, including working at the Mass State Senate, Mass Executive Office of Public Safety, Brown Rudnick, LLP, Bingham & Cushing, LLP, and Fitzgerald Attorneys at Law. He has never been granted or denied a gaming license in any other jurisdiction. He is new to gaming. He is licensed to practice law in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Both licenses are in good standing and no disciplinary action have been taken. He also has a real estate sales and broker's license in Massachusetts. Massachusetts was the investigation confirmed to be active and in good standing. Like Ms. Gregoire, there were no significant issues uncovered related to his application for licensure and demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence his suitability, and therefore, like Ms. Gregoire, the IEB is recommending that the commission vote to grant him a key gaming executive license.
I personally was excited to see 2 residents of Massachusetts with no previous gaming background being hired for gaming executive positions within this new industry.
Did you say that Seth's application came in September of 2014?
He was, well, he was hired in 2014. With MGM, there's, he was hired, but there really wasn't a gaming establishment. So I think that's, my recollection is when he was hired. So he's been there for about a year, and I think that he's been working with,
And when did he apply for this form?
oh,
For
the
this,
license, I don't know when they actually had him submit the forms, because it's a little interesting with the regulations, as far as us making a determination when they actually need to apply for the license, because, a qualifier for, say, MGM would have to apply as soon as they're deemed a qualifier. But we didn't want folks, because there is a fee associated with the license, we weren't pushing them to apply for the license necessarily right away while there's, the gaming establishment really wasn't up and running. But it got to the point where he was doing enough work, there was enough contact that we thought it's now appropriate to start having those folks require them to submit for licensure. That was more of a policy discussion.
That's something we probably ought to hear about, think about.
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen in spades coming
Right.
up. And it sounds like you're just kind of working on when's the right time.
Yeah, we're trying
I
to
think-
to that reasonable balance
Yeah.
where, because there's a fee and because there's a process, we're trying to figure out the right time. And initially, we didn't want to push too early because they'd have to be up for a renewal when the casino was opening. So this is a good time, but I can certainly bring that before the commission.
Would the fact that if the person is hired to just do initial work and there's no intent for them to work at the gaming establishment,
Right.
be one of the factors rather than someone who, in this case, a general counsel with all intent to be part of that
Right.
gaming establishment team?
Right, well,
executive team?
that would also be whether they're required not to have a license. Right. A license,
Yeah.
well, there's 2 issues. One, are they required to have that
Correct.
key gaming exec? And then when do we do that? So the when has been a little tricky because, under the law, they're employees of the gaming establishment. And there's no building yet, so
Yeah.
that's where it was a little tricky.
I would think sooner rather than later because
Yeah.
if there is an
Yeah.
issue.
That's what I was going to say. There's an
Right.
optics problem
Yeah.
if something goes
Right.
wrong, and we haven't gotten around to it yet.
Right.
But I understand there's issues. So let's
Yeah.
Amy, would you make sure that I don't see Janice, but that goes on to the pending list for issues that we ought to have on the agenda at some point?
I thought you were also asking about how long it takes us to.
That's where I started, yes.
Yeah, I'm still curious about that, and you can tell me later.
Yeah, Yeah, I'd have to check on this, because these, I'm trying to, I just don't know the date that came in.
Okay.
And given, there's been a lot of prioritization within the IEB, so
Yep.
someone, who is looking to, for example, the temp licenses, we're looking to get them hired, they're up and running, the folks at Penn, those got a higher level of priority because we wanted to get people to work. Because he already had a temp license, finishing the investigation had less of a priority than the folks that needed to get into their positions and get to work, so that's part of it.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but I look forward to, whenever you can,
Yeah, yeah.
ascertain in general,
Yeah,
average,
right. Oh, yeah.
whatever standard deviation we have.
Yep.
Just roughly how long it takes
Okay,
us to,
okay, that's
to
fine.
process this.
Okay?
Yep.
No, did we vote?
You have to vote.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that the commission approve the key gaming executive licenses for Roberta Gregoire, Plain Ridge Park, and Seth Stratton with MGM Springfield.
Second?
Second.
Commissioner McDonald seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
All right. Director Vanderlinden, item number 6.
So Commissioners, I thought I would kick this off before we have our other fellow colleagues present. We are here today to get some guidance from you about an interpretation of our regulation. It's 205 CMR 133. There is a provision in it. It's Section 7 under, I think, 133.06. And it talks about what happens when someone on the voluntary self-exclusion list goes into a casino and then gambles and then is asked to leave. There's been a situation, and we're not going to discuss this particular situation today, but to put it into context, where someone on the list goes into a casino, they put money in the machine, then they're escorted out. What happens to that money? There's a ticket, obviously, that references what went in, and how do we characterize that? Our section of our regulation attempts to do that. And we obviously talked a little bit about our regulation in general, but we never talked about this specific section and how that would impact someone who is on the voluntary self-exclusion list. So we have today, to discuss this with you, we have Director Vanderlinden, who can talk about what, his thoughts on the interpretation and what he's seen in other jurisdictions. We have Deputy General Counsel Grossman, who helped write the regulation at the time. And we also have Director Bruce Band, who can also tell you about how it's enforced here and also in other places where they've been. So we are looking forward to your guidance on whether we think there should be a clarification or a change, whether our interpretation makes sense, or what else we might need to do.
Great. Okay, so good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This is actually a very interesting issue, and one that I'm anxious to discuss with you and get your feedback on. In terms of taking a look at what is happening in other jurisdictions, how do other jurisdictions manage when a
Excuse me, Mark, excuse me. Was it made clear exactly the fact pattern here that we're talking about? I didn't hear you saying.
Well, let me clarify so
Yeah.
we're all on the same fact pattern. So this is the fact pattern. A person who's on the voluntary self-exclusion list and has entered into a voluntary self-exclusion agreement goes into a casino, and they begin to gamble. So they put some money in a slot machine, or they put money into a table game. But it becomes more of an issue with a slot machine. So at that point, they're recognized as someone who's on the list, and they're asked to leave, because under our regulations, the casino has to require them to leave, so they're escorted off the premises. Our regulation says that you can't keep your winnings and you can't recoup your losses, but it's oftentimes not quite that clear. So what about money that was put in the slot machine, but you haven't quite pressed the button yet?
You haven't lost
know?
it yet. In other
You
words,
haven't
you
won it or
put in
lost
a
it.
$10 bill, and before you push the button, you're identified and you're asked to leave. Your $10 is still in there. There's a voucher that will
Yes.
verify that. Do you get your $10 back or not? That's
the pattern.
presenting issue here.
We've interpreted that under our current regulation to mean you can't get that money back. And so the question really is that a fair interpretation? We did not discuss it when we enacted the reg, and so we want some guidance on how we should proceed with that.
Right. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
And-
Mark.
And if I may, it further states within our regulation that winnings, including jackpot winnings, chips, tokens, machine credits, ticket vouchers, or any other form of winning, whether in the individual's possession or control, while on the premise of a gaming establishment or presented for payment, that would be confiscated and transferred to the gaming revenue fund within 45 days. So I think that as the regulation was written, that situation specifically is addressed, but the question is whether or not that's the intent of the commission. We took a close look at what other jurisdictions are doing. We took a look at 9 different jurisdictions. 6 of the 9 have a regulation that's very similar to what our commission has in addressing it that way. 3 of them, or actually 2 of them, state specifically what they'll confiscate really is only the winnings of the individual, but that the tickets, chips would be cashed in before the person would be escorted or cited for trespassing. New Jersey, the 3rd is somewhat unclear what it is that they do or how they manage that situation.
So Mark,
I can address that for you.
Yeah.
They take all the chips, vouchers, or anything that the person has visible on the person. They don't go into their pockets or something like that.
Okay, so it would actually be similar to the way that it's written in Massachusetts.
so are you saying, I don't agree with your reading of this document, so let's not make it about what the reg says, let's make it about the actual activity. So are you saying that in 6 of the 9 jurisdictions, 7 of the 9 jurisdictions, that in our fact pattern, our case in point, you put in $10, you haven't pushed any buttons yet, you get recognized and you're escorted out. In 7 of them, they would keep the $10.
Correct.
Okay.
For the record, I do agree with the read of the regulation. So we might have a
You
split.
agree with what?
We might have a split direction over here.
You
Well, it
agree
doesn't
with
really matter. I mean, it doesn't,
what? Do or do not?
I do agree with the way the regulation is written and has been interpreted. Now,
So you're
whether
s-
that was the intention, we can discuss about it. We can discuss it, but, but I'm just setting the stage for what may be a healthy discussion on
But-
the approach here.
but we can clarify the reg to make sure it says what we want.
Yes.
We need to figure out what we want it to say.
Okay.
So, and that's what we're differing on.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we're talking about this fact pattern, not debating what this says, because it doesn't matter. We need to understand what we mean to have happen under this fact pattern, and then we'll make sure the language says that.
To shift gears a little bit and how I would want to address this issue is, was that the intent? I support the regulation, and I go back to, as Todd and I were talking about it when we were drafting it, and even further back into the responsible gaming framework. I recall when we were talking about developing this regulation, we didn't want this to be punitive. This is a person who signs up for the voluntary self-exclusion program is taking an active step in addressing a problem that they have, and that should be celebrated. We should recognize that that's a significant action by this person who has a problem with gambling. And we address that mostly in what should we do if they're discovered on the floor? Should they be escorted off? Should they be cited for trespassing? Some states cite the individual for trespassing, and we decided, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want it to be a penalty. I see this as a different type of issue, and what I'm looking at is how can we make this as clear as possible to the individuals that are coming onto this list of what will happen should you violate this voluntary self-exclusion agreement. And it's agreement that they enter into, and there's a large amount of responsibility for the individual to adhere to that part of their agreement, of this voluntary self-exclusion agreement. And so when a person violates, certainly there is a responsibility of our operators to enforce it as we've outlined in the regulation, but there's also a burden of responsibility, a large burden of responsibility on the individual who has signed up and entered into that agreement.
I certainly support, the regulation. When we talked punitive, we were absolutely talking about not arresting the person for trespass, which I wholeheartedly agreed with. What's important to me, and I had this discussion, was how are our Game Sense advisors advising the person so they clearly know what they're signing up for? They will clearly know, look, you won't be arrested, but you will be escorted out, and there will be no return of funds. I mean, that's part of the message, right, that they want. They want they recognize an issue, they want to be self-excluded. Giving the money back, I think, sends the wrong message to the person who has admitted a problem. But what's really important to me is all of those things are explained clearly to the individual, and when they sign, they know exactly what they signed up for. So that's the piece, I think, that would be important to me, that that person clearly knows. No money back. Doesn't matter if you just put it in or you've already gambled a couple of times on the machine. None of that matters. You will not receive any money back because you've said you have a problem and you want to self-exclude. These are the rules. So that's the piece I think I would want to know if, in fact, we're being very clear about what we're saying.
What is in the form on that note?
Yeah, do you know
What,
at this point
I do.
whether,
I do, and to that fact, I think that we should revisit this. In fact, we have, and we're redrafting that part of the self-exclusion agreement. You know, we've worked with our GameSense advisors and the staff at the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling, our gaming agents, anybody who is what we call a designated agent in order to administer the voluntary self-exclusion agreement, to do it in a very specific manner and method. Given that, I think that there is some room for improvement here. The piece of the terms and conditions that specifically addresses this part of the regulation, the individual needs to initial that they understand that. It states that I understand that I may not collect any winnings or recover any losses resulting from any gaming activity at a gaming establishment for the duration of the exclusion period. And that's it. It doesn't explicitly state what is in the regulation, but our regulation considers winnings are, as I interpret it, and General Counsel Blue and Counsel Grossman may have a different interpretation as well, but I interpret winnings as the jackpot winnings, including chips, tokens, machine credits, ticket vouchers, in any other
but
form.
even on the commission, we don't interpret the word winnings the same
Yeah.
way. So it's clear that there can't possibly be a consensus when we don't agree on it. So I think inherently, and so once we determine what we do want to do in this specific case, not this individual, but this particular kind of a fact pattern, then we can you can write the Game Sense advisor, because I certainly agree, whatever we come up with, particularly if we support your present interpretation, I agree with Commissioner Cameron that making sure the person has heard what the consequences are is critical.
I agree.
I'm having a difficult, I'm sorry.
well, isn't there also a question of what constitutes a wager? Because there is language in regulations or a bet. Doesn't that operate here as well?
And I think it does as to what works on a slot wager, because if you put $1,200 in a slot machine and cash out that ticket, the IRS counts that all as winnings.
Yes.
And you have to pay, withholding on that.
Yes.
If you put in $1,200, don't bet anything. You
Yeah.
just cash out without betting.
Yeah.
The IRS interprets that,
See, the way they've interpreted it for slot machines, we've gone back and forth on this.
even
for-
if you can document that that's what happened.
That we had a patron do that, and.
I can't believe that's true. That's just, I can't
I'm not in
accept that.
disagreement with you, but that's the way it was interpreted.
I can imagine that if you can't document that's the case, that you might be required to pay taxes on it. But if you can document that, I
Well,
can see it.
I think from the perspective of the IRS rules, when you go to the window with that ticket, they're going to report it. What happens when you get to the IRS?
Well, that's
Maybe a
different.
different story.
That's totally
but-
different.
but
That's not what
they'll
Bruce said, though.
characterize it.
Yeah. What Bruce said is the IRS makes you pay on that, even if documented.
And that's what happened in this one instance.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened since then.
Probably appeal it.
Yeah, I can't accept
I'm-
that as a principle of IRS law.
I can't imagine either. I'm having a difficult time reconciling the text of the regulation with the, with the hypothetical. I mean, if somebody putting in $10, into a slot machine doesn't play, and then gets identified and is escorted out. I mean,
How can that be
the
construed as winnings?
language, the, and,
Well, the
one
more,
of the oldest, most prevalent rules of construction in the law is the plain meaning rule. A gaming licensee shall not pay any winnings derived from gaming to an individual who is prohibited from gaming. And then the rest of it goes on to repeatedly describe or use the term winnings, including jackpot winnings, chips, tokens, machine credits, but machine credits are part of winnings, ticket vouchers, or any other form of winnings. How could the $10 that is put into the slot machine be considered winnings if no gaming has occurred?
well, that's a good question, but I think I have a more likely scenario, which presents a pragmatic difficulty.
Well, let's,
But may I? I mean, that's a very relevant question that I don't know can be answered necessarily, or I look forward to that. But the more likely scenario is when somebody puts in $10 and
But we're not
plays
talking
whatever.
about that example.
No, no.
This is where this gets confusing. If you want to talk about that, we can, but we have to figure out this particular fact pattern. If you bet and you lose your 10, you win your 10, you win 15, you lose 30, and you've got 10 left, but after you've gone through all that, that's a different situation.
Yes.
We can talk about that if you want,
Okay.
but that's
I
not
look
what we're
forward to
talking
that.
about right now. And we aren't really talking about a definition of winnings, because I happen to agree with you, Commissioner Zuniga disagrees. So it doesn't matter. We don't have to debate what this says. We have to debate what we want it to say, and then we will make sure that it says that. So let's go back to the specifics. We're dealing with this because it happened. It actually happened. It's not going to happen very often. It's a weird case.
Just
It's
as a heads up,
Generally,
I have another one on my desk as we speak.
okay, so it will happen.
It's a
So
timely
the-
consideration.
The situation that you're describing is different and worth discussing and making sure we agree on that, but it's a different situation. We do have to come up with a policy for this fact pattern.
I don't see it that different, though, because it's, anyway.
Yeah.
I understand that you see a big difference, but if you're in the self-exclusion list, and you're already in the casino and you've inserted $10, okay, in your example, you have not done any gaming, I might argue, are you defeating already the purpose? Are you already engaging in the activity that you yourself thought you were excluding yourself? Now, has it constituted a wager yet? Good question. Maybe we can help define it. Do we need to clarify that?
No, we don't need to clarify. We
Or
need to
in the
dec-
form?
No, but we need to decide whether we think that person should get the $10 back or not.
Yes.
That's all we have to decide.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And if
Well,
the
I
person,
think- I think
if the
they should.
person doesn't get it back, then I would say we have to
Right,
amend
right,
amend this,
So we'll
because
get to-
winnings
right.
are winnings.
Right, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
right.
And I don't want to muddy this up a little bit, but the one instant, we had somebody put a certain dollar amount in, play a little bit, but, to what that individual said, didn't lose it all. So what do you take the whole thing there or something? And that's, an issue
Yeah.
as well.
Well, that's true, and again, we have a question in front of us where we do know the facts.
Yes.
Apparently, there's another one. In the next section down, we talk about where it's reasonably possible the losings will get collected and paid back to the gaming fund, paid back to us. So there are situations where we know you can go in and try to figure out what happened. But again, that's Commissioner Zuniga's issue, and that is a different issue from one where the facts are known. They did not gamble. And in some people's minds, they haven't yet lost that. It's certainly not a winning in some people's minds. So it sounds like you think, for various reasons, once you put the money in, you've broken your pledge not to gamble, and you should be penalized for it. You lose your $10 whether you gamble or not. That's a legitimate point of view. But but that's is the issue. We need to figure out where the five of us come down on that question.
Let me take the known gaming scenario. Putting the $10 in, whether the IRS, $10, so it's not $1,200. And cashing it out is going to require, at least currently, for me to go to the window, because I can only cash it in the window. And it's going to require the licensee to see, among other things, like whether they're in that they owe taxes to the state, whether they're also in the self-exclusion list. And at that juncture, they are
No, no,
directed.
But
Yes.
in this fact pattern,
No, no.
they've- okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, bear with me. In the 10, just inserting and cashing out without IRS disclosure, currently, correct me if I'm wrong, the licensee has to run,
Well, they could go to an automatic redemption machine, one of the voucher machines.
and what would the automatic redemption do? Does
You
it
would
do
stick-
also,
You would stick that in, you would get your $10 back.
does that machine check against self-exclusion?
It wouldn't at that point, what would check against self-exclusion is that player played with the player's card, and that would send up a signal, that way.
Which you can't do, because if you're on the list, your
Yeah, you're
player's
not
card
playing with the
privileges
player's
are
card.
terminated.
As
So
far-
we
far as-
wouldn't know who they are.
Yeah, as far as investigating this, I think with the, current technology and everything, you could get some idea of loss by investigating it through camera coverage, and even though they don't have a card in the machine, at times they're playing, you can look at ACSC and see what the machine says is wagered, lost, and
Yeah,
so on.
but that
It-
gets
It's a lot
into
of
a-
work, but.
Gets into a different, that's a different
Okay.
issue, different fact.
All right. Besides the kiosk, the redemption kiosk, my understanding was that agents, before they pay out tickets, run through the self-exclusion list.
Correct.
For under 1,200, if I understand
Yeah.
it, you just hand them the ticket and they give you the cash. They don't check ID or anything like that.
But any
You can go to- you can
ticket
just
over
go to the
1,200.
kiosk
If
it's
you go
under
where you have to
500
file
dollars.
any kind of paperwork, then
Until
an ID
the
would be
1,200?
They don't even know who you are. But to that point, and before Commissioner Zuniga and Commissioner Cameron, you draw your conclusions, I'd like to just outline the other side of the story, if I may, to Commissioner McDonald's point initially. And I appreciate the opportunity to present the other side of the story here. And as we do have a real-life situation, it became very real for us. And we went through this whole thing when we drafted the regulation. And as Mark said, I don't think we ever really spent a lot of time contemplating what it meant to define winnings. And I think we did it very imprecisely at that. And before I go any further, I just wanted to thank Jim Baldacci from Penn National Gaming, who actually conducted the survey of some of their properties to find out for us how this issue is handled in the other jurisdictions. And what we saw as we looked at some of the regulations is most of the other states just say that someone on the list can't collect winnings. But it doesn't really define what a winning is or is not. So it was important for us to find out what the practice was. And what we found out, as Mark discussed, is that though the vast majority of jurisdictions do take your money from you if you're on the list, there are two that allow a person who's on the list to cash out, assuming that it's not actual winnings, meaning it's not a jackpot where the machine throws up and now we know that's winnings, or presumably if you're at a blackjack table or what have you and they see that you just won a hand, or you're at the craps table and you just won actual money, now that's winnings. But otherwise, what we have is just, as you said, it's just money you stuck in the machine. It's not winnings under any plain reading definition of it. But to me, when I think about this issue, I like to start at the very beginning. And with your indulgence, I'll just go back really quickly to that. And think about why it is that we have a voluntary self-exclusion list to begin with, and what its purpose is. And when you distill this issue to its very essence, I believe what you're left with is that we, the Commission, has developed a number of tools in the tool shed to allow people to help themselves, people who are suffering from some type of disorder or prospective disorder, or they have a gambling problem, or some moral objection to gambling whatsoever. But the bottom line is, in our shed, we've provided people with a number of tools. We have the voluntary self-exclusion list. We have play management. We have game sense. And the common thread amongst all of these tools is that they're designed to help people, bottom line. They're not designed to be punitive in any way, shape, or form. And so the question is here, are we being consistent with that theme when we talk about taking people's money because they're caught in a casino and there's money stuck in a machine? And my position is that no, it's just not fair, and it's not winnings, and it's not the way it should be done. The way that we should consider doing it is the way that these other two jurisdictions do it, apparently, which is that they find you on the list, they tell you to cash your ticket, cash your chips, and skip town. And that is the fairest way to deal with it. It serves the therapeutic intent of this particular rule. I think it's a mistake to think that you are really deterring people by telling them that if you come in here, we're going to keep your money. I don't think there's any empirical or clinical evidence or data that supports that conclusion. I think it's just wrong and it's unfair. And you can hear about all kinds of anecdotes about how someone may keep coming back in and keep coming back in. But my answer to that is, so what? We're here to help people. These are not criminals. These are not bad people. These are people, as Mark stated, who took the step of recognizing an issue and voluntarily placed their name on this list. So I say, so what if they keep coming back in here? We're trying to help them help themselves. And as part of addiction, as part of disorders and this type of issue, we have to remember that there are relapses that happen. Oftentimes there are multiple attempts that an individual has to undertake before they're able to fully combat whatever issue they are facing. And for us to take someone's money just seems like it leads to the wrong result, unless we can
Let me just
be
clarify
certain
first.
that they're actual winnings.
Well, but in,
That's
We
the,
got
that's
your
the key.
If they're actual winnings, I agree 100% that we
How
take
would
it.
you go about determining whether somebody's credits are winnings or purely credits?
That's another great point. Now, I will just represent the Penn National Gaming position on this, which I suspect is similar to some of the others. And I think it's, in some respects, similar to ours, which is, I don't think, and they don't think, it's really beneficial to engage in any type of forensic investigation as to whether a person is up or down or whatever. So, I think the burden should be on us to, or the agent at the casino, to know for sure that the monies at issue are winnings. That means that a jackpot was hit on the machine. Clearly, those are winnings. Or a dealer, an agent, or someone else saw a person win a hand of blackjack or a bet at craps or what have you. But at the end of the day, I'm suggesting we come up with a more precise definition of what a winning is. But in any event, the burden is on us, not on the person. The presumption should be that the money are not winnings and that they should get the money back. Again, I think it's very important to keep in mind these people did not do anything wrong. They're not criminals. They are trying to help themselves. So why is it important for us to come in and take people's
But,
money?
but, wait a minute, you come back to the notion they haven't done anything wrong. Haven't they necessarily entered into a contract with us and our licensee not to be on site?
If you want to get into a legal discussion, perhaps there's a valid contract, but that misses the point. The point is we're trying to help people here.
We
You're
are.
assuming that giving the money back helps them. I would take the opposite viewpoint, that it's not punitive. You understood the rules clearly, and giving the money back is like, oh, I get my money back, I can try this again, where if you get no money back, you understand
This was for
clearly
real.
those are the rules, and, I think that's a better way to help
But
someone,
see, I think
frankly.
you are imputing rational, non-addictive thinking to a situation where someone is suffering from some type of issue. And it's not a fair leap, I don't think. I think people who suffer from these issues don't always put those
Todd,
dots
excuse me,
together.
you've taken this, and I've been trying to get everybody to stick with the fact pattern. You've taken this to a new level, which is that they should be able to take their voucher and cash it out and go.
Yes.
And not to worry about whether there maybe is some kind of a winning or it was their original cash, not to worry about it. So to our fact pattern, very narrow, you put in $10, you haven't gambled at all. Your answer is that person should be able to get his $10 back.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fine, we got it. You know, your larger view is interesting and about gambling and stuff and about addiction, and I sympathize with you too. That's why I feel like in our narrow fact pattern, it's a penalty to take that money away. If it's uncertain, if you've gone like this and you can't tell, no reasonable person can figure out, have you spent more, do you still have money left in? It's gone. That's the chance you take. No, to me, that's straightforward in Commissioner Zuniga's case. But where you can document that the money has not been lost, that's still that person's money, and it effectively is a fine if you take that money, and that's a step we would not want to take.
I look at it more not as a penalty, but as a deterrent. If we have a person that's on the list caught gambling on the floor, we would go after the casino and penalize them. Just about every state does that. It's a little unfair to put them where they're getting financially hit on this, when there's no repercussion at all for the player to go as many times as they want.
No, that's not right, Bruce. They lose everything. If they win, they lose. If you can't tell what they've done, they lose.
That's what I'm saying, but if we make it where we just give them back everything that they have,
Not
there's
gi-
no
what-
real
what do you mean
deterrent
give-
to
what do you
me.
mean- What do you mean, give them back everything? that they-
Let's say they have a voucher and, some chips from the table, and we let them go cash out and leave.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Well, that's kind of,
That's what Todd was
what-
talking
yeah,
about.
Well, we're trying to
Todd was
we're trying not to go there for,
Yeah,
we're,
okay.
we got it,
Well,
we
I-
have to,
I
we
think
have
the
to
other
determine this
I-
specific issue,
Okay.
We
In
can-
this
if-
particular case, I think we all understand the facts. I come down on the side, I'm agreeing with Mark, that, you know what, once you enter into the contract, you clearly understand the rules, you enter the facility, you violated the contract already. Never mind putting money in the machine. So I am coming down in favor of clearly educating people that these are the rules, and you sign up for those rules. And I think it keeps it clean, and people realize if you break your contract, you come in and you put money, you lose that money, and you're escorted out. That's how I think is the best way to help the person. That's one.
So Commissioner Cameron, for good reason, is in favor of, in this fact pattern, once it's been clear, this may not apply to the particular person in case, but going forward, as long as it's absolutely clear that this is what's intended, that in our fact pattern, the $10 would be lost, would not be returned. Just so we can get this behind us and then move on, let's see if we're at a point where, there's sort of like a straw poll, it sounds like
Yeah, I am on that too.
you would say they do not get,
They do not get
do
the
not
10,
get it
the-
back.
the the 10 back.
I'm
for-
saying they do get it back,
Yep.
Commissioner,
I,
in our narrow fact pattern.
In our narrow fact pattern, I don't think it is necessarily, I don't think it's necessary to have a conversation about, do we need to further define winnings in this fact pattern? Because if you look at the regs, the individual, regardless of what they've done other than put the money in the machine, the individual has been identified by our licensee. The regulation calls for, where appropriate, a gaming agent is contacted. The only way to get the money back out of the machine is through a ticket voucher, which that gaming agent can't cash out. So there is no way to get the money back, as I see it. And echo the comments of Commissioner Cameron about the contract, but if we're just looking at this narrow fact pattern, for me, it's not necessarily a question of whether it's winnings or not. If you look at our process, the ticket voucher is coming out because you don't get the cash back. And the gaming agent can't take that cash voucher, the gaming licensee can't take that cash voucher to a window or to a kiosk and redeem the money.
I don't understand that. Why can't they?
They're not allowed under our
But
regulations.
don't worry about the
not the
regs.
player.
We're going to rewrite the regs to tell us, to do whatever we think should be done.
Right.
Do you think it's right or wrong for this person X, who's put in the $10, has not played anything,
Right.
and then they get discovered as a violator of VSE, should they be able to get their $10 back or not?
And I say no, based on what I interpret our regulations as saying. How about if I shorten it up that much? Can't get the money back.
No, but do you think say we didn't have a reg, we were just starting fresh, we have no regs. One of the things that Mark puts before us is, what happens when a person violates the VSE rule, walks up to a slot machine, puts in $10, doesn't ever gamble, then is identified. We don't have any regs. What's the right thing to do in that situation?
The right thing to do is not to give the individuals monies back.
Okay,
Now,
then-
you're going back to, we've already had regs around the application and the program and what they've already signed up for.
Okay, so that's three of us. I mean, I'm interested. What
I'd
do you
give the
think?
money back. I don't think it's a closed case. And
I don't think it
I'd
would.
add
We're-
I'd add a, a contractual analysis to it that comes to an exactly the opposite conclusion of Commissioner Cameron.
Right.
Because if we didn't give the money back, if we didn't give the money back, a person could go into the Rentham District Court and do a small claim against the casino, and that the person would provide the judge with a copy of this regulation, would provide the judge with a copy of the contract, which refers
No,
to
but-
winning.
no, you're in the reg-
No, I'm just getting a.
You're being a judge, right?
Well, I'm simply saying, I think they're, with the regulation written the way it is, that they. That's not the point, that it's not even close. They would be legally entitled to get it.
But if there were no regulation, you were
Then it's
just.
something else. But I'd give them back anyway, because I think
All
it's
right,
a
that's all
matter of.
that's all that
Yeah,
matters.
I'd
All
give
right,
them
so
anyway as a
it's
matter
3 to
of,
2.
it's a matter of equity.
It's 3 to 2, you don't give it back.
Give it back. What about the scenario, which I still believe, and that is more likely, which is, because let's face it, they walked into the casino, they put some money in there. I'm gonna guess, I know their intention, right, to hit that button.
Sure.
The more likely scenario is that by the time somebody is spotted, which again happens more often than we care for all the reasons that we know, for all the reasons that you articulate, relapses and things. And you've had a level of activity that includes original credit, winnings, losses, perhaps more credit, more winnings and more losses, and you have a balance. To me, because of that more likely scenario, at the time that you're spotted, granted, it should be clearly communicated, perhaps better, in the self-exclusion contract, in the regulation, but because that scenario is more likely, and it would be very onerous for anybody, the gaming agent on the floor, the dealer at the table, to try to say, oh, those are winnings and those are the original credit.
I would agree with you, but we
Yeah.
don't have to address that, because we've just taken the hardest case.
Okay.
Which is, they put their 10 in, they never gambled, everybody knows it, everybody agrees to it, we take their $10 anyway.
Okay.
So as long as we're taking that $10, we're taking everything else. So we don't have to deal with your fact pattern.
That's
So-
how I came to the original pattern, which is because, anyway,
Yeah.
that,
All right, so,
well said.
given that this has been so contentious, we probably should have a vote, just to have it straight. So, you started out, you want to try to
Mr.
frame
Chair, I
this?
move that that our intent of this commission is for any time an individual who has voluntarily excluded themselves enters the casino, puts money into a machine, that money, it's our intent that that money be confiscated as part of the self-exclusion policy. And that we're also directing staff to make sure the training is appropriate, clear up the regulations so that's clearly stated, and get back to us with a draft that is clear to understand, as well as policy for gaming agents that make it very clear to the individual excluding that that is the policy.
I second that.
Yeah, and I think everybody knows what we're trying to say here, and I think we don't want to be prescribed but limited by winnings. We're trying to make it very clear what we are saying here, and I'm sure we can figure out a way to say that. So, is there any further discussion about this? All in
Yeah,
favor?
well, further discussion is that with the motion having been framed the way it has, I'm in favor, of that motion, but I am not in favor of anybody being denied the return of their of the money which indisputably was not gambled.
Well, that's what she means to be saying, so that's what, that was the intent of her motion.
And I thought it was more going forward.
Oh, no, going forward, yeah, going forward. Commissioner Cameron's been very clear that you should not lose your money if we didn't do a good job of telling you what this meant. Because common people might very well read winnings to read it the way you and I are reading it, which is, if I put my 10 bucks in and I never gambled, that would not be considered winnings. So she's been very clear. You got to understand what the rules are, and that would very clearly imply that if there's anybody that's had this experience prior to now, you know,
No, it
they
doesn't.
probably,
Maybe, so could we then distinguish that if anybody, up until now, if anybody, you know, whether it's one or two cases, you know, that we decide that separately? That it come either before us, or what do we do about the two cases pending? Because we did say, and you did say, we're
Yeah.
not going to discuss them in detail.
There's a couple of concerns with that. I think if we want to consider cases, prior cases, we're going to need to consider them based on their very specific terms, and we're also going to have to consider how we treat the licensee, because under our current regulations, which the licensee is trying to comply with in good faith, were they to give the money back, they run the risk of being penalized, because they would have violated
Penalized
our
by whom?
regulation, by
By
us.
us.
So we need, well, no, this is how our regulations are set up, in that, you know, a licensee that violates our regulation is potentially subject to penalty by us.
but we can deal with that.
So if we're going to do individual cases that predate the commission action today, I think we want to think about a specific way to consider those, and those are going to be very fact-based. We're going to need probably more information than we have on the current cases that are before us. So we should think about, if we want to do that, that's fine. If we don't, if we just want to say that this interpretation is the one that we think governs, but we do have to make some clarification, we can do that too, and that, you know, relates back to the individual cases that are on the table. But we did specifically say that we were not going to discuss individual cases at this point, and we didn't. But we, you know, want to discuss maybe how we impact that by actions we take today.
Okay, so the intention of the motion was that going forward, in our fact pattern, that person would lose the $10 so long as the rules are written clearly and the person who causes the person to sign the VSE form has clearly and yeah, thank you, what it says, including this particular fact pattern. Once you put money into the machine, if you are found out as being in there, it is gone no matter what. That's as long as that person has been properly informed of that. That is the intent of the motion, if I have it right. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
And so let's deal with that. So,
I just want to interrupt for a second. One of the things you might want to think about is how we're going to prove that they were adequately informed at the time they entered into the agreement. This is a question that Mark would have to deal with in the gaming agent. So, you know, let's assume the fact pattern you have, but the person involved comes back and says, I wasn't clearly informed. So we're going to have to figure out how do we make that interpretation?
The form should clearly say, these are the circumstances in which you will lose your money. And it clearly says it, and the person signs the form that they have clearly said it.
Yeah, I would simply insert in winnings and losses, credits.
Yeah,
You cannot
Yeah.
recover existing credits.
I feel comfortable that through revision of that form and staff training that coupled together, that we can make that message very clear.
And you're going to need to change regulations under the application to reflect credits.
We might.
We'll double check that and make sure.
okay, further discussion on Commissioner Cameron's motion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Opposed? You're not opposed?
I don't think so.
All right.
I thought it was going forward. And we're not addressing the two cases which are before.
No, but in the future, if a case puts in the $10, no gambling,
Well,
they lose their $10.
But after the regulation has been revised to no longer refer to winnings and
Yep.
rather credits and otherwise be clear on that, I have no problem with that.
Okay, fine. So the motion carries 4-1. Okay, now, what else do we have here? Do we have other, all right, so we do, I mean, this all came up initially, I think, because I heard about the specific case in point, and it did not strike me as fair. I may be in the minority about that, I don't know about going forward, but I think we do need to resolve apparently two cases which will have occurred prior to this, and these people have a right, if they want to, they have a right to appeal to us.
The
And I-
second case is a little different in the fact that one of our gaming agents discovered the individual who had been playing for 4.5 hours on the floor. So it actually might lead to a complaint against Penn for not identifying that individual.
Well, that's a totally different situation. That's Commissioner Zuniga's fact pattern. So it sounds like there's really only one case that we know of. And as we've said, this is a really unusual case, because for the most time, it's rarely gonna happen like this.
How long does it take to push the
Yeah, right. But,
Commissioner Zuniga said it's a small snapshot in time.
probably will never get it.
I would suggest, Mr. Chair, we understand now the intent of the commission, the majority of the commission. Let us go back to the staff level and see if there's a resolution that's possible. If not, we'll figure out what the process is.
that's fine with me. Is that all right with everybody else?
Yes.
Okay, good. Such for
We
that
have,
lunch. Yeah, right. All right, where are we?
Director Lightbound.
Director Lightbound.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today, in front of you,
Good afternoon.
you have a request from Plain Ridge for reimbursement from their Capital Improvement Trust Fund for the tractors. You approved this project earlier going forward, and now they've completed it. And today, we've got Senior Financial Analyst Doug O'Donnell here. He gathered the information supporting the proposal, and Steve O'Toole, the Director of Racing for Plain Ridge, is here if you have any further questions. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What you have in front of you is the request for reimbursement of the Plain Ridge Capital Improvement Trust Fund. It dated January 7th. You're in the packet, it said 2015, but we had adjusted that and corrected it. It's 2016. And there was a request for consideration back in August of 2015 at the meeting, which you did approve for them to move forward. They in fact did move forward and purchased all the equipment that we had in the request. There was a letter in there from Dixon Salo, who is the architect, who does in fact approve the project. He went out, inspected the equipment. It has been paid for. There is also a letter from Mr. O'Toole, who is a manager at Plain Ridge, with all of the backup documentation for the equipment, all of the canceled checks, and pictures of the equipment itself. So the project is complete.
Okay.
How's the tractor working?
They're working great.
Okay.
Doug, roughly, or if you know, or if you can get back to me, how much might be currently in the capital improvement trust
After
fund?
the payment of this project, there will be approximately $300,000 in the capital improvement trust fund. They also have another $100,000 in the promotional trust fund.
Right. Okay.
And that increases on, as you know.
On that handle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do we need to vote on this? All right.
Well,
Let me,
I'd just like to make an
Yeah.
observation, that I was intrigued by the name of the vendor, Big Boys Toys, and
Last time.
I was just only disappointed they don't carry Kubotas, because I have a Kubota tractor.
I just,
I have no substantive comment to make.
That was.
well, I want to just throw something out there. Yeah, we're in this, we've talked about this with our new executive director and everybody else. We're in the business at this point, of, among other things, of kind of reconsidering our regulatory structure. You know, are we regulating as much as we want, less than we want, or more than we want, in a host of different areas? This came up before. This money comes from the track. You know, it's money that comes out of winnings, or the handle, I guess, the takeout at the track. It is used at the track. And it feels to me like to have to go through all this, you know, to spend basically their money on their facility, is a symbol of a residual regulatory environment, which is just, in these day and age, way over the top. You know, to give us an accounting, maybe, you know, at the end of the year or something, but to to have to prove to this extent, you know, that these expenditures are on the up and up, seems to me to be way over the top. And I don't want to make too much out of this, but I mean, I do think there is, you know, we think about this because of working on the DFS thing. There is a residual mindset about what's appropriate to handle gambling that you intuitively sort of bring forward. But now we're trying to say, hey, you know, is this really necessary? So I just would throw out, if people totally disagree with me, then we can forget it. But if we agree, maybe it's something we can start to think about.
I, for one, couldn't agree with you more, and it was the steam coming out of my ears as I was reading this again, other than I got a chuckle out of Big Boys Toys invoice. You know, it's a legacy program for whatever reason. It was started and incorporated however long ago. You know, and they're going to make decisions about capital improvements just based on, one, their need to operate, and two, their ability to continue to market the facility as an attractive place to come. You know, not to mention, we have an architect signing off on, you know, the purchase of a bunch of tractors, which, you know, no knock on, you know, the profession of being an architect, but
What do they know about tractors? Maybe it should have been a Kubota.
unless they have a Kubota and they know personal.
Remind me, Alex or Doug or Catherine, the requirement to approve disbursements, is that a statute or a regulation? It's in the statute.
Yeah.
So all of the points are well taken, but until we, and we have taken steps to send to the legislature updates to 128A and C. And it seems like there's a big agreement that this could be among, you know, the many changes
This
to
would be at
consider.
the top of the list.
Yes. But we are required to do this by statute.
Well, do this, maybe not. We're required to approve, sounds like.
Yeah.
What prove consists of, I mean, it doesn't have to be this, you know.
Well,
So-
good point.
Yeah, so I would think, go ahead.
The money's in, then the money's out, that's all statutorial, right?
Right.
Right, so,
That's
but I
correct.
think if we, again, I'm just throwing this out, and it sounds like at least Commissioner Stebbins has a similar instinct, and I think there's a vastly less onerous way for us to approve. We don't want anybody stealing the money, so, and those things happen, so,
We
you know,
could-
some kind of a simple something or other.
Could we
Well,
delegate
we
it
were,
to one
Or
commissioner?
delegate it.
We were looking into, that's one of the things with our regulations. There's a few things with the racing regulations that we wanted to get in place, you know, before the meets open in April. The medication changes, and this was one of them. You know, the possibility is to, for you all to delegate to the executive director. And as you remember, earlier this summer, Suffolk has an ongoing water diversion program. The amount was huge, and as the money comes in, we pay it off. And this summer, you guys did vote to give that delegation to the executive director, that the next time there was enough money in the fund for Suffolk to receive a payment on it, they could. And Doug is currently working on the memos for that to give to the new executive director, to just get the money out that way. And then, in that case, we won't have to bring that in front of you.
Okay, so I think it's clear to see, you haven't said anything, Commissioner, but it sounds to me like everybody agrees that if this particular process can be streamlined and simplified and still be in compliance with the statute, that is what we would like to have happen, and that is just indicative of a host of similar kinds of things that we want to be thinking about. So we'll let you guys figure out how to do that.
But you still need to vote on the tractor.
Yes.
All right, okay, that's right. All right, so do we have a motion?
So, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the request for reimbursement for Plain Ridge Racecourse Capital Improvement Trust Fund dated January 7th, 2016, for the new tractor. Tractors, correct.
And a harrow.
Hmm?
And the harrow.
Second?
I second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
All right. I believe that brings us to the end of this delightful day. Anything else? All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.